He didn't bark, didn't growl, just sat locked on the hidden panel beneath him. Everyone thought the Monroe case had gone cold, until the dog brought the past back from the attic. The attic was the last place Tom wanted to check. They'd already been through the kitchen, the basement with its spiderweb-covered shelves, and the master bedroom where Lila found a box of cracked porcelain dolls. The house smelled like damp wood and stale air. Wind pressed against the loose window panes, and every creak of the floor made it feel like something was watching. But the attic door had to be opened sooner or later, so Tom pulled the string hanging from the ceiling and unfolded the ladder. Lila stood at the bottom, flashlight in hand. "You sure it's safe up there?" Tom gave a half-hearted shrug. Only one way to find out. He climbed the ladder slowly, each step groaning under his weight. The attic was dim, the only light coming from a single window on the far wall, thick with dust and grime. He waved away cobwebs, expecting boxes or maybe a family of raccoons, but what he saw stopped him cold. A dog. A large German shepherd sat in the far corner. Thin, legs stiff, eyes locked on Tom. Its coat was matted, streaked with dust and something darker. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared. Tom swallowed. "Lila," he called down, voice tight. "There's a dog up here." Lila blinked up at him. "Alive?" "Very." He took another cautious step. The dog didn't flinch. It sat perfectly still beside a section of floor that looked different from the rest. One of the boards was newer, slightly warped, the nails more modern. And the dog was right on top of it, like a soldier on watch. Tom slowly backed down the ladder. "We need to call someone." When animal control arrived, the officer was a young woman named Dana. She came with a leash, a gentle voice, and a bag of liver treats. "Poor thing looks like he's been through a war," she murmured, peering into the attic. It took nearly 20 minutes to coax the dog down. Even then, he resisted. Not aggressively, more like he didn't want to leave whatever he was guarding. When Dana finally slipped the leash around his neck and gave a gentle tug, the shepherd stood, his movements stiff like he hadn't stood up in days. He glanced once at the panel behind him, then started down the ladder, slow and careful. On the floor, Dana knelt and rubbed his ears. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" she whispered. But the dog's head turned. He looked back at the attic. His ears twitched. His tail didn't wag. His eyes didn't soften. He was still on duty. Even as Dana guided him toward her van, he stopped at the front porch and looked back. The house stood silent behind them. The dog gave a low, almost inaudible whine. Tom watched from the steps, heart thudding for reasons he couldn't name. He had the sudden, eerie feeling they hadn't found the dog. The dog had let them find him. And whatever was in that attic, it wasn't ready to be forgotten. The attic felt heavier without the dog. Tom climbed the ladder first, flashlight in one hand and a pry bar in the other. Lila followed close behind, brushing away the thick cobwebs that clung to the rafters. The silence pressed in, thick and uneasy, as if the walls were holding their breath. Dust floated in the narrow beam of light, and every footstep stirred up the smell of old wood and something else, something sweeter, almost like dried flowers and faded perfume. They walked slowly, careful not to step too hard on the warped planks. Tom led them to the spot where the dog had sat, right over that strange-looking floorboard. He crouched and tapped it gently. It sounded different, hollow. The nails were newer than the rest, silver instead of rusted brown. Tom looked back at Lila. "Someone fixed this spot," he said softly. "Not that long ago either." Lila didn't speak. She just stood there, arms folded tight across her chest, as if waiting for something bad to rise up through the wood. Tom wedged the pry bar beneath the edge and gave it a careful pull. The board creaked, groaned, then popped free with a shudder that echoed through the rafters. Beneath it was a shallow space, maybe a foot deep, and inside it, wrapped in something dull and torn, was a small, dented tin box. He reached in with gloved hands and lifted it out. The cloth it was wrapped in crumbled at the edges as he unwrapped it. It had once been a baby blanket, soft pink, now yellowed and fraying. Tiny blue flowers were barely visible in the faded pattern. Lila's breath caught. "It's a baby's blanket," she whispered. Tom nodded slowly. The box was heavier than it looked. He turned it over in his hands, then gently opened the lid. Inside were only a few items, but the kind that spoke louder than words. A rusted, heart-shaped locket with a broken chain. A black and white photograph of a baby girl, her wide eyes staring up from the faded paper. A curl of dark hair on her forehead, and a small folded note, brittle with age and stained with time. Tom opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. 5 words, scrawled in pencil. "Her name is Rose. Don't let him find her." Lila pressed a hand to her mouth. "Tom," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared down at the box, the locket, the picture. The baby couldn't have been more than a year old. In the photo, someone's arm held her up, but the person was cropped out, intentionally, it seemed. Tom sat back on his heels. The attic suddenly felt colder. "Somebody hid her," he said quietly. "Whoever Rose was, someone was trying to protect her." Lila knelt beside him, eyes on the box. "And the dog, he was guarding it." Tom nodded. He looked down at the photo again. The baby girl stared back at him through time, as if she'd been waiting. Whatever this was, it wasn't just forgotten. It had been buried. On purpose. The box sat on the kitchen table, untouched since they carried it down from the attic. Tom hadn't said much since. Lila kept looking at the photo of the baby girl, her tiny smile frozen in time. The note haunted her. Don't let him find her. Whoever wrote those words hadn't just been scared, they'd been desperate. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was Deputy Reed, the one who'd stopped by earlier in the week to drop off welcome forms for the new homeowners. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with thick silver hair and a badge that looked older than the cruiser he drove. When Tom explained what they'd found, Reed asked to see it himself. The moment he saw the photo, his face changed. He took off his hat, eyes locked on the image, like it had reached into some buried place in his memory. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked quietly. Tom told him about the attic, about the dog guarding the floorboard, about the blanket, the note, the box. Reed sat down, slowly, like his legs had forgotten how to hold him up. "This house," he said after a long pause, "belonged to a woman named Elise Monroe. She lived here with her baby girl, Rose. They went missing in October of '83. Lila leaned forward, heart thudding. "Missing?" Reed nodded. "Whole town searched for them. Elise was quiet, kind, worked at the diner off Main. She was only 23. Her brother, Jacob, was the one who raised the alarm. Said she'd been planning to leave town. Said she was scared of someone." "Who?" Tom asked. Reed looked down at the table. "She never said, but Jacob thought it was someone close, someone she knew. Police didn't take it seriously. They chalked it up to a runaway. Said she probably left with the baby. Changed her name." "But you didn't believe that," Lila said. Reed looked up, his eyes tired. "No, neither did Jacob. He said Elise would never leave without saying goodbye. And she never took her car, never emptied her bank account, just vanished." He picked up the photo gently. "That's her. That's Rose. I'd bet my badge on it." Tom pulled the note out again, laying it beside the locket and the blanket. "We didn't find any records of this in the property documents." "You wouldn't," Reed said. "After the case was closed, the house sat empty for years. Jacob tried to buy it back, but it got tied up in some sort of estate mess. Eventually, it ended up at auction. No one stayed long. Folks said it felt wrong." Lila looked at the box again. "Do you think Elise was hiding from someone in this house?" Reed didn't answer right away. He looked toward the stairs, toward the attic. "I think she was hiding her baby, and I think that dog was trained to protect her. Or maybe just remembered." Tom swallowed. "What happened to the original dog?" "His name was Scout," Reed said. "He disappeared not long after Elise did." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the window panes. Something had been buried for 40 years. Now, piece by piece, it was coming back into the light. The shelter was quiet that morning. The old German shepherd lay curled in the far corner of his kennel, eyes half closed, his breathing steady but slow. His fur was still dirty from the attic dust, and his ribs showed through his coat like the bars of a cage. But he didn't seem afraid. He just waited, as if whatever mission had kept him in that house for so long was still unfinished. Dr. Keller, the vet on duty, knelt beside the kennel and spoke softly. "Hey there, big guy," she said, sliding her scanner gently across his neck. The screen beeped and blinked. A number appeared. She wrote it down and typed it into the National Registry. A few seconds later, the results came up. "Ranger," she read aloud. "Born 12 years ago. Originally adopted from a shelter in Kentucky. No reported owner in the last 5 years. Last known address. Cleared property." Huh. Ranger didn't react to his name. He didn't lift his head or wag his tail. He just stared at the wall, his expression unreadable. Dr. Keller frowned. "What were you doing in that attic?" Later that afternoon, Deputy Reed came by. He'd promised Tom and Lila he'd follow up on the cold case. When he heard the dog had been taken to the local shelter, he asked if he could see him. He hadn't expected anything unusual, but when he stepped through the door and caught sight of Ranger, he stopped cold. "Dear Lord," he whispered. Dr. Keller looked up. "You okay?" Reed didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the kennel, as if he were approaching a ghost. Ranger lifted his head, eyes narrowing, ears twitching forward. Reed crouched down. "He looks just like him." "Like who?" "Scout," Reed said, voice barely above a whisper. "That was Elise Monroe's dog, her German shepherd. Big, quiet, just like this one, always by her side." Dr. Keller tilted her head. "But this dog's only 12. Reed nodded. "I know. Scout's been gone for nearly 40 years, but look at him." Ranger pressed closer to the bars of the kennel. For the first time since being brought in, he let out a soft, low sound. Not a growl, not a whine. Something in between. Something that made the air feel thick. Reed looked up. "You ever hear stories about dogs remembering places, even generations later?" Dr. Keller gave a slow nod. "Memory runs deep in animals. Smells, sounds, instincts. Sometimes, family." Reed glanced back at the file. "You said he was adopted in Kentucky?" "Yes," Keller replied. "That's where the Monroe family originally came from, before Elise moved here." Reed stared into Ranger's eyes. "Then maybe this isn't just any dog." The shelter was still as Ranger stood, stretched slowly, and walked to the front of the kennel. He sat, calm and steady, and looked directly at Reed. There was no fear in his gaze, just a quiet, haunting certainty. "He's not done," Reed said softly. And somehow, in that moment, they both knew. This dog hadn't been lost. He had returned. The test results came back on a Thursday. Dr. Keller printed them out, her hands trembling just a little as the machine spat out the pages. She had run the DNA analysis mostly to satisfy a strange curiosity, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But what the results showed made her sit down in the empty staff room and stare at the paper for a long time. Ranger was a direct descendant of Scout. It was a match not only in appearance, but in blood. Somehow, through years and litters and miles of lost records, the line had survived. Scout, the dog who once guarded a young woman and her baby, had passed something on. And now, more than 4 decades later, one of his bloodline had returned to the very place where it all began. Dr. Keller made the call to Deputy Reed first. When she told him, he didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said, "You're telling me this dog, the one that was sitting in the attic, is Scout's grandson?" "Possibly great-grandson," Keller replied. "But yes, the match is close. Direct male line. There's no mistake." Reed hung up the phone and drove to the shelter in silence. He kept seeing Elise's face in his mind, that gentle smile she wore even when things were hard. She used to walk Scout through town in the mornings, holding Rose against her chest in a fabric sling. Scout always walked on the left, always between Elise and the road. People remembered that. Now Ranger was back. Same walk, same stare, Same posture. Only no Elise. No baby. Just a sealed tin box and a name scratched into a faded note. Ranger had been adopted out as a puppy from a rural rescue near Lexington, Kentucky. His litter had been brought in after someone found them living under a collapsed shed on abandoned land. No mother. No chip. Just wide eyes and thin legs. Records showed he'd been adopted by an older couple from the next town over. He'd lived with them for several years before he went missing. They filed a report, but no one ever found him. Until now. 5 years he'd been gone. No sightings, no tracks, no hint of where he'd gone. And now here he was, back in Dutton Ridge, Tennessee, sitting in the attic of the same house Scout once called home. It didn't make sense. And yet it did. Deputy Reed stood outside Ranger's kennel and watched the old dog sleep. His chest rose and fell slowly, his ears twitching now and then, as if listening to something only he could hear. "You knew where to go," Reed said quietly. "Didn't you? Some things couldn't be explained by files or blood tests. Some things ran deeper than that. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something passed down in the bones, in the heart. A memory carved into the soul of a bloodline. Ranger hadn't stumbled onto that house. He hadn't gotten lost. He'd come back, to finish what Scout started, to protect what Scout could not. And maybe, just maybe, to uncover the truth neither of them was ever meant to forget. Tom hadn't planned to go back into the basement. The place gave him a strange feeling, one that clung to his skin long after he left it. The low ceiling, the cracked concrete floor, the rusted shelves with jars of nails and bolts that hadn't been touched in decades. It all felt wrong, like someone had left in the middle of something. Like the space was holding its breath. But Ranger had started pacing again. Since returning from the shelter, the dog had spent most of his time sitting near the kitchen door that led down to the basement. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he just stared at it. Every now and then he would get up, walk in circles, then return to the same spot and lie down with his head on his paws. Tom noticed it after the third day. Lila did too. "He's trying to tell us something," she said, watching the dog from across the room. "Like he's waiting for us to catch up." Tom grabbed a flashlight and went down. The basement was just as cold as he remembered, damp and silent, with that old smell of mildew and earth. Ranger didn't follow him, but Tom could hear his paws pacing above. Something in that steady rhythm pushed him forward, deeper into the far side of the basement, where the light barely reached. There was a section of wall at the back that never sat right with him, a row of concrete blocks that didn't match the others, slightly newer, a little too smooth. He knelt and tapped on it. It sounded different, hollow, not solid like the rest. He stood up, looked around for a tool, and found an old crowbar resting behind a stack of lumber. The wood crumbled when he touched it, but the bar held strong. He wedged it into the seam where the strange blocks met the older ones and pulled. The wall gave way with a sharp crack. Dust and old spiderwebs burst into the air. Tom coughed and waved his light inside. Behind the false wall was a small space, maybe 4 feet deep. The air inside was colder. Still. His light swept across the opening and stopped on a shape wrapped in layers of plastic and linen, curled like someone had lain down to sleep and never gotten back up. His heart dropped. He stepped back, hand trembling, then forced himself to look again. Beside the bundle was something else, something smaller, a faded leather collar. The metal tag almost rusted through, but the name was still there. Scout. Tom sank to the floor. The flashlight clattered beside him. She'd been here the whole time. Elise Monroe hadn't run away. She hadn't disappeared with her baby in the night. She had been hidden, buried in the very bones of the house she tried to escape, and someone had made sure no one would ever find her. But they hadn't counted on Scout, or the dog that came after him. Upstairs, Ranger let out a low, trembling howl, a sound that shook the walls and told the truth better than words ever could. He'd remembered, even if no one else had. And now, finally, Elise wasn't alone. The morning after they found the remains, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. Lila stood by the window, one arm wrapped around herself, staring out at the yard where Ranger paced quietly. The sheriff's department had sealed off the basement, and deputies came and went in silence, avoiding questions they weren't ready to answer. Deputy Reed returned just before noon, his face drawn tight. He set a folder on the table, thick with old reports and court documents. "There's something you need to see," he said. Tom opened the folder slowly. At the top was a yellowed police report from October 1983. Elise Monroe, age 23, had filed a request for a protective order against her former boyfriend, Victor Laramie. He was older, Reed explained, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't live in town anymore. Had a history even back then. Fights, drugs, some sealed stuff from his juvenile record I couldn't access. Elise said she was scared of him, said he'd been following her, showing up at the diner, watching her through the windows at night. Tom's stomach turned as he read Elise's handwritten statement. The words were shaky but clear. He told me if he couldn't have Rose, no one would. Why didn't the police act on it? Lila asked, her voice cold. They said she didn't have proof, Reed said, shame pulling his voice low. She had no money, no lawyer. They treated her like a scared single mom exaggerating a breakup. Then one day, she and the baby were just gone. And him? Tom asked. Victor? Reed nodded toward the last few pages of the folder. He moved out of state, Kentucky, changed his name slightly, started a roofing business, married once, divorced. Now runs one of the biggest contracting firms in the region. Community leader, donates to youth sports, gets invited to banquets. Never questioned? Lila said in disbelief. Not once. Tom leaned back, hands tightening on the table edge. He left town right after she disappeared. Within a week, Reed confirmed. Said he had family out west, but we know now he was running. Outside, Ranger stopped pacing. He sat at the edge of the porch, staring down the driveway like he was waiting for someone to come back. Lila flipped through the folder again, stopping at a black and white photo clipped to the last page. It was Victor Laramie, maybe in his 20s, leaning against a car with a smirk that made her skin crawl. His eyes were cold, confident. She looked at Tom. He did it. Tom nodded. He thought he got away with it. Reed stood. He might have, if not for that dog. They looked out the window again. Ranger sat perfectly still now, head high, eyes sharp. He hadn't made a sound since the night they found Elise, as if he was waiting for the rest of the story to catch up. Victor Laramie had buried the past with his own hands. But Scout remembered, and now, so did Ranger. And they were coming for the truth. The house was quieter now, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that sat in the walls, heavy and watchful. The crime scene tape had come down. The deputies were gone. And Ranger was home again. A judge had granted temporary custody to Tom and Lila after Dr. Keller vouched for them, saying the dog had clearly bonded with the couple and was more settled in their care than anywhere else. No shelter could hold a dog like Ranger. He didn't need a cage. He needed purpose. The first thing he did when he returned was walk straight to the attic stairs. He didn't hesitate. He didn't sniff or wander. He climbed each step slowly, his nails clicking against the wood, then stood at the top and looked back, waiting. Tom followed him up, flashlight in hand, with Lila close behind. The air felt different, colder than before. The attic still smelled of dust and old wood, but now there was something else beneath it. Something sour, like decay that had settled into the bones of the house long ago and never left. Ranger walked to the far corner and sat down in front of a narrow strip of wall. He pawed at it once, then looked back at them, eyes steady. Tom stepped closer and ran his hand along the paneling. It was solid wood, but not part of the original frame. The grain was different. The nails looked newer, just like the floorboard they had found earlier. There's something behind this, he said. Lila didn't speak. She stood frozen, arms crossed tightly against her chest, watching as Tom fetched a crowbar and started working the edges. The wood resisted at first, groaning and splintering as he pulled. Then, with a loud crack, the panel gave way and fell forward with a crash. Behind it was a shallow recess no wider than a closet. Inside was a wooden cradle, small and hand-painted, with faded flowers along the edge. Dust clung to every surface. A moth fluttered out as the flashlight beam touched the far corner. Tom stepped closer and stopped. The cradle wasn't empty. Inside were the tiny, brittle remains of a child, wrapped in what had once been a soft blue blanket, now yellowed with time. The bones lay curled, fragile, and forgotten. Lila gasped, hand over her mouth, and turned away, tears already filling her eyes. Beside the bones, resting near what might have once been a shoulder, was a small silver bracelet, tarnished but still readable. Tom leaned in and gently lifted it into the light. The engraving was simple. Rose. Ranger let out a low whine. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft, aching sound that filled the space like a breath that had been held too long. Lila stepped forward, her voice shaking. She never made it out. Tom nodded, barely able to speak. He killed her. There was nothing more to say. Only the creak of the floor beneath their feet. Only the stillness of the attic where a cradle had waited 40 years to be opened. And Ranger, sitting guard like he had done before. Like Scout had done before him. Because some promises don't fade with time. Some are passed down. And this one had waited for the truth. The results came back faster than anyone expected. Lila had barely poured her morning coffee when Deputy Reed pulled into the driveway with a look on his face that said everything was about to change again. He walked straight to the porch where Tom and Lila waited, holding a manila envelope tight in one hand like it might fly away if he let it go. "The bones in the attic," he said, voice steady but low. "They're not roses." Lila's cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floorboards. "What do you mean?" Reed opened the envelope and laid out the pages. "The DNA doesn't match Elise. Doesn't match anyone in the Monroe family line. It's another baby. Unidentified. Likely around the same age as Rose at the time, but no connection in any known databases. That means..." Tom sat down slowly, eyes wide. "Rose didn't die here." Reed nodded. "It looks that way." Lila's breath caught in her chest. "Then where is she?" Reed reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second document. "That locket you found, the one in the box with the blanket and photo, it had a smudged fingerprint. At first, they didn't think it would give us anything, but someone ran it through the federal database just to be sure. And it matched a woman in Idaho, a preschool teacher named Anna Keller, 39 years old, lives under a sealed adoption record, grew up in foster care until age 6. Was adopted by a couple who've both since passed." Lila leaned forward, heart pounding. "You think she's Rose?" "We did more than think," Reed said. "We ran her DNA. It's her. Anna Keller is Rose Monroe. She's alive." Tom stared at the open yard, blinking slowly. "She never knew." "No," Reed said. "She had no idea. We reached out quietly. She was willing to submit the test. Said she'd always felt like there were gaps in her childhood, but no one could ever explain them. Her earliest memory was waking up in a strange room with a stuffed bear. After that, everything's blank until the foster system." Lila covered her mouth, her eyes filling. "Elise must have gotten her out. Somehow. Maybe someone helped her. Swapped the babies, hid her somewhere." "Maybe," Reed said. "Or maybe Elise died trying to save her, but someone else finished what she started." Tom stood up and looked through the window at Ranger, who sat watching the woods, still and calm like always. "And the dog knew," he said softly. Reed followed his gaze. "Scout guarded this house until the end, and Ranger came back, almost like they were waiting for the last piece to fall into place." Lila's hands shook as she picked up the photo from the table. The baby girl with the little smile, now a grown woman across the country who had no idea her whole life had been built on a miracle and a sacrifice. "Does she want to come here?" she asked. Reed nodded. "She said she's on her way. Some truths take a lifetime to uncover. Some lives begin again when the past finally finds them. And some dogs never stop watching until everything lost has been brought back home." The news spread fast after the DNA results were confirmed. Local papers ran headlines about a missing baby found alive nearly 40 years later. Reporters called it a miracle. Some called it luck. But Tom and Lila knew it was neither. It was Ranger. He had been quiet since that night in the attic. But something changed after the discovery. He paced more often. He stared at the front door as if expecting someone. At night, he curled near the base of the stairs, not the bed. Every time the news mentioned Rose, now Anna Keller, he'd lift his head. His ears would twitch, and sometimes he would let out a low, strange sound that wasn't quite a growl but wasn't peaceful either, like he knew the story wasn't over yet. Lila noticed it most. She'd sit beside him, hand on his back, whispering things like, "She's coming, boy. Just wait a little longer." When Rose finally arrived, it was on a rainy morning that soaked the gravel driveway and turned the yard into puddles. A rental car pulled in slowly. She stepped out wearing a long gray coat and holding a folded paper in one hand. Her eyes scanned the old house like she was looking at something from a dream she couldn't quite remember. She was quiet, calm on the outside, but her fingers trembled. Tom opened the door before she knocked. "You're here," he said, not knowing what else to say. "I had to come," Rose replied, her voice soft but clear. "It's strange. Everything in my body feels pulled toward this place, like I've been here before." Lila stepped forward and hugged her without a word. Rose didn't resist. She just stood there for a moment, letting it happen, like she wasn't sure what to do with kindness that came without conditions. Then Ranger stepped into the doorway. He didn't bark. He didn't rush. He simply walked out onto the porch and stopped a few feet from her, his head tilted, his eyes locked onto hers. Rose dropped to her knees. Ranger stepped closer, slowly, carefully, and then lay down in front of her, pressing his side against her legs. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just placed a hand on his back, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked steady. "He's part of it, isn't he?" she asked. "Somehow." Tom nodded. "He found the attic, found the box. He led us to all of it." Ranger closed his eyes, as if to say yes, but also to say it had been a long wait. Inside, Rose walked the halls in silence. She ran her fingers along the banister, paused in the kitchen, stared up the staircase. When she reached the attic, she didn't hesitate. She climbed the ladder and stepped into the dim space where dust still floated in the air like whispers. She saw the cradle, the old floorboard, the empty space where secrets had once been hidden. "I was supposed to die here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ranger lay beside her again, resting his head across her feet. "No," Lila said gently. "You were meant to live, and he made sure you did." And for the first time in her life, Rose didn't feel lost. She felt home. Victor Laramie was arrested in the middle of a golf tournament. He had just finished the 9th hole, shaking hands with a local politician, when 2 unmarked cars rolled up quietly along the edge of the green. The agent stepped out without a word, and by the time Victor noticed them, it was too late. He didn't run, didn't speak, just looked at the badge in front of him and slowly raised his hands. At the station, he sat in the interview room with his usual smug grin. He wore an expensive watch, polished boots, and a look that said he still believed none of this would stick. He had built a life out of lies, contracts, connections, a cleaned-up past no one dared question. Until now. They showed him the locket first. He barely glanced at it. Then they laid out the DNA report, the location of Elise's remains, the bracelet from the cradle with Rose's name still clear beneath layers of dust and time. They showed him the photo of Ranger, lying beside the box that started it all. And when they said the name Scout, Victor's face twitched. Just for a second. "What happened in that house?" Agent Thorne asked him. Victor leaned back, letting out a tired breath. "She was going to leave," he said. "Elise. She said she was taking the baby and disappearing. Said she didn't need me, didn't need anyone." He looked down at his hands. "I told her if she did, I'd find her. I'd take what mattered most." The room went quiet. "I went to the house at night," Victor continued. "Thought I could scare her into staying. I didn't mean to, at first. But she grabbed something heavy, tried to hit me. The baby started crying. And that damn dog, Scout." He paused, eyes distant now. "He came out of nowhere. I didn't know he was in the house. He bit my arm, tore through me like I wasn't even there. I panicked. Everything went red. What did you do, Victor? He swallowed. I hit Elise. Hard. She fell. I don't remember how many times. The dog was going crazy, barking, bleeding. I locked him in the closet. I wrapped her up, dragged her down to the basement, and walled it off. And the baby. He shook his head. I thought she was gone. There was blood on the cradle. She wasn't crying anymore. I didn't check. I just ran. The agent stared at him in silence. What he'd done couldn't be undone. But his confession opened the final door that had been locked for 40 years. Later that day, when Deputy Reed told Tom and Lila what Victor had said, Ranger was lying in the front yard beneath the old oak tree. His ears twitched when Reed approached, but he didn't get up. He didn't need to. He had heard it all. Lila knelt beside him and ran her hand through his fur. She fought for her baby, she whispered. And Scout tried to stop him. That's why you came back, isn't it? You were finishing what he started. Ranger didn't move. He just let out a deep sigh, the kind that carries the weight of things finally laid to rest, the kind that says the last lie had been broken. And the truth, after all this time, had finally come home. The attic was quiet again. It had been cleaned since the search teams left, swept free of dust and cobwebs, the broken panel carefully nailed back in place, though the boards still creaked with every step. The old cradle was gone, the evidence removed, the remains taken into care, but the air still held a weight that couldn't be swept away, the kind that lives in walls, in the way a room remembers. Rose stood near the small window, a candle in her hands. The flame flickered as a breeze slipped through the cracks in the wood, but it held steady. She placed the candle on the floor where the cradle had once rested, then lowered herself beside it and sat in silence. Ranger lay next to her. His head rested on his front paws, his body stretched long along the floorboards. He didn't make a sound. His eyes were open, watching her, but not needing anything. Not food, not praise, just the quiet peace that came from knowing everything had been brought full circle. Rose looked down at him and smiled, soft and slow. I don't remember her, she said gently. Not really. Sometimes I think I hear her voice in dreams, but I can't be sure. It's more like a feeling than a sound. She reached out and placed her hand on Ranger's head. His ear twitched, but he didn't move away. I think she gave up everything to keep me safe. I think she knew someone was coming for us, and I think she trusted Scout to stand in the way. Ranger's eyes didn't leave hers. I read the reports, she said, voice steady now. What he did, what he admitted, he thought I was already gone. She looked back at the candle. But I wasn't. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked as Tom moved about downstairs. Lila was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea. The Bennetts had become more than caretakers. They were anchors now, helping her piece together the life that had been taken, then returned. They never pushed. They just made space. Rose looked around the attic again. The slanted ceiling, the old beams, the shadows in the corners that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the wind. Somehow, she didn't feel scared here. This was the room where her mother had hidden her, the room where the first dog had stayed, and the room where another had returned, carrying memory in his bones. She leaned back against the wall, feeling the chill of the wood behind her. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing his side against her leg. It's strange, she whispered, how something so broken can still feel like home. The candlelight danced on the floor, casting long, soft shadows across the boards. Outside, the wind passed through the trees and rustled the leaves, but in the attic, everything held still. Not in mourning, in peace. Elise never made it out, but her daughter did. Because Scout didn't leave. Because Ranger came back. Because love doesn't disappear, not really. Not when it's carved into loyalty and passed on like a secret only the heart understands. Some dogs don't forget. Some wait as long as it takes. And some never leave at all. Before you scroll away, do us one favor, smash that like button, subscribe, and help us bring more powerful stories like this one to life.